How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Average Joe, the series where I'll be taking a look at a vehicle and telling you whether or not I believe it's worth the average player's time, or in this case, their money. On today's episode, we're going to be covering the Mirage F1C-200, a premium Rank 7 12.0 battle rating fighter jet found in the French air tech tree. Now, before we jump into the review, I'd just like to apologize because this video would have been done a few days sooner if it wasn't for the fact that I actually postponed recording the audio for this video not once, but twice. Now, the reason for that is because the fact that if I had recorded the audio when I had originally planned to, I would not have been able to give an honest opinion on the vehicle without it being tainted by the fact that I did not have a good experience with this vehicle whatsoever. But with all that out of the way, let's jump right into what this vehicle is capable of, starting with the primary weapon. Now, your primary weapon is going to be two DEFA 5.53 30mm cannons, with a combined total of 270 rounds between them. Now, in my opinion, the DEFAs are actually pretty good guns. They have pretty consistently high damage, which is pretty rare nowadays, with the downside of being kinda low velocity, so a little bit difficult to hit your shots if you're not used to them. However, the Mirage F1C introduces a new issue, and that is where it's mounted. On the Mirage F1C, it's actually going to be mounted on the belly of the plane, which makes it very difficult to hit, especially snapshots. Overall, I do think the guns are good on this plane. It is just a matter of getting used to it due to the fact that the DEFAs are mounted in a very weird place and have very low velocity. Additionally, you could also add two more via the gun pods on the wings, which will add another 360 rounds if you bring both of them. Now, in my opinion, you do not need to bring the gun pods due to the fact that the DEFAs, if they hit something, they usually kill anyway, and in most scenarios that I have used the gun pods and gotten a kill with the gun pods did not make it any easier or any harder, they just kind of were there. Moving on to secondary weapons, I'm only going to be talking about 3 of the missiles. The 4th one just isn't worth talking about in my opinion, and I will not be talking about air-to-ground ordnance due to the fact that that is just not something I do on my channel. Starting off with the Magic 2, this is easily the best part of the entire plane beyond any shadow of a doubt. The Magic 2 is an all-aspect IR missile that has 3 incredible qualities that just make it one of the best missiles in the entire game in my opinion. However, it does have one drawback that we will talk about. Starting off with the good qualities, first off, IRCCM. IRCCM on this missile is very similar to the R-73's, meaning unless the person flares in a very particular way, when you fire this missile in rear aspect and even side aspect, it's probably just going to ignore all flares. To pair with that, it also pulls incredibly hard. It says on the stat card 35 Gs, it can pull way more than that. On top of that, it's one of the fastest accelerating missiles in the entire game. If you fire this thing close to somebody, even if it didn't have the IRCCM, it would probably go through their flares anyway due to the fact that the flares just wouldn't have the time to heat up. However, like I said, there is still one drawback. That drawback being the fact that the range on this missile is rather limiting. I personally would not recommend shooting it in rear aspect beyond 2 kilometers, however I have seen it reach up to 2.4. I just would not recommend doing it beyond 2 due to the fact that if the person's maneuvering at all, the missile will lose too much energy and probably not reach them. Now, one last thing about this missile that I'm going to say before we move on is the fact that if you really wanted to, you could use it in head-ons within 1 kilometer. If you fire it at the person and they didn't pre-flare, odds are it's just going to go through any flares they drop beyond you firing the missile. It will almost always slam them out of the air if you do this properly. However, it does have the downside of, well, if you're not careful, you're just going to get shot or hit by a radar missile. And on top of that, if they do properly flare it and you fire the missile, you're down a Magic 2 and you got nothing out of it. Oh, and I nearly forgot, you can only carry 2 of these. Moving on, we have the Matra R530E. The 530E is a rear aspect IR missile that is, well, pretty bad. You can only carry it on either the 2 inner pylons or the central pylon on the plane, and overall, it's just not really good. It can only pull 15 Gs, it has no IRCCM or flare resistance to speak of. It's pretty slow to start maneuvering off the rail, and on top of that, if it maneuvers basically at all, it loses nearly all of its energy. The only somewhat redeeming quality this missile has is the fact that its range is much higher than the Magic 2's. If you fire it at somebody when you're going at high speed and they're going in a straight line, I have seen it reach targets up to 4.5 kilometers away. However, I wouldn't rely on this. Realistically, you can expect it to have around the same range as an AIM-9L if you're lucky. However, due to the fact that it doesn't pull very hard and it's, well, very slow to start maneuvering, realistically people can avoid it without even having to drop flares, and if they do drop flares, no matter what, the missile's going to go for them anyway. Now, in my opinion, I don't believe that these missiles are worth the extra weight, however, I will leave that final decision up to you. And lastly, we have the contender for potentially the worst radar missile for the battle rating that you get it at, the Matra Super 530F. Now, on paper, this missile doesn't actually sound all that bad. It is your typical medium-range SAR missile, meaning if you lock the target and you hold the lock the whole time the missile travels, it should reach its target. With one glaring downside of only 20 Gs of pull, meaning you can't use it at nearly as close a range as you might like. However, due to the fact that this missile's seeker is beyond terrible, it actually is one of the worst missiles in the entire game for the battle rating that you're using it at. Now, I am certainly not the right guy to explain to you the actual properties of how this radar missile works to explain why its seeker is so bad, but I can give you a brief summary of how it feels to use it in-game. Basically, the seeker feels like it's delayed, meaning if a target turns, you'll have to wait about a second or two before the missile will start to adjust for that. So if somebody is maneuvering at all unpredictably, the missile is just going to go flying past them or not even try to maneuver into them at all. To pair with that, the missile seeker loses track of the target very easily, and because of this, any amount of chaff will instantly break your lock and the missile is just going to go straight for it. Now, the radar is partly to blame for this, however, I'm going to talk about the radar later, so right now let's just put all the blame on this missile, because it's terrible, it deserves it anyway. The only kills you can expect to get with this missile are on people that are flying in a straight line, not paying attention, that didn't bring chaff. Those are the only people you should ever expect to kill with this missile. Now that we're done with the weapons, let's move on to the flight performance. Now, when it comes to acceleration, you are lacking a little bit. You are definitely much worse than something like a Phantom, but you're also out-accelerated by basically all of your peers. Not the biggest deal, but it is still worth noting. However, your top speed is actually quite good. You will redline at about 1384 IAS. This is definitely not incredible by any means. If you're in a full up tier, basically everything is going to outspeed you. However, it is higher than a lot of things around your own battle rating, especially if you get a down tier. Now, when it comes to maneuverability, at low speed and medium speed, it's pretty terrible. However, at high speed, you actually don't compress all that hard, so you can take the advantage there. So if you can enter a turn fight with something that does compress quite a lot, you might actually be able to pull into them on the first turn and kill them. However, beyond that, you really should not stick any dogfights in this plane with anything except for maybe Phantoms. Lastly, when it comes to the airframe itself, we have energy retention, which is a very weird case. At high speed, you will lose speed incredibly quickly. However, at medium and low speed, you don't lose nearly any, which is really weird. And it's very annoying because when you're at high speed, you'd like to keep that speed so that you can keep maneuvering, and at medium and low speed, you'd like to lose it so that people can overshoot you. Getting a reversal in this plane is nigh impossible unless the person you're going against is either really bad at aiming or just doesn't know what they're doing. And because of this, you really do just have to know when to cut your losses and get out. You typically will outspeed most of your opponents. You might not out-accelerate them, but if you outspeed them and you know when you've lost the fight already, you can get out, build up your speed again, and try and reset. Moving on to the miscellaneous things, we're going to start with the radar. This radar's terrible. There's really not too much to say. It has a search mode and it has a search MTI mode. Both of them are pretty bad. There is an ACM MTI mode, however, it's also very inconsistent at locking onto targets. And when you do finally lock a target, the MTI mode and the track mode cannot work at the same time. Because of this, any amount of chaff will instantly break your lock. This is what I meant earlier by you can't blame it entirely on the missile because the radar itself is partially to blame. The radar really doesn't have any redeeming qualities, so you might think, oh well, there might be some other redeeming qualities when it comes to, oh, maybe the RWR, and you would be so wrong. The RWR in this plane can only ping you in 4 directions. Directly ahead of you, directly behind you, about 100 degrees to your left, and 100 degrees to your right. It won't tell you what's locking you, it won't tell you if you're being tracked, it won't tell you if there's a missile, you just kinda have to know. If the RWR is just being pinged now and again, you're probably fine. The second it turns solid, assume the worst. But to be fair, outside of up tiers, your RWR in this plane is not going to be very important. However, the second you're in an up tier to 12.7, well, all of a sudden you're fighting F-14s and Fox 3s. If you're in a 13.0 game, you have AIM-120s. It's going to be pretty painful. You're going to really wish you had a good RWR the second you see an AV-8B+. Now, you do have one last good quality, and that is the fact that you get a load of countermeasures. You get 48 large caliber and 144 regular countermeasures. And due to the fact that you don't need chaff too much at this battle rating, you can split them pretty generously towards flares, and you should be fine on countermeasures at that point. It's very unlikely that you're going to die to a missile in this thing unless it was a Fox 3 that you didn't know was coming due to the RWR, or it was an IRCCM missile that there was just nothing you could do due to the fact that you were probably already slow from trying to fight someone else. Now, if you are going to play this plane, I'm going to give one piece of advice. Just bring the Magic 2s, nothing else. Get your 2 guaranteed kills with the Magic 2s by firing them in rear aspect, go land, repeat. It is the most consistent 1 to 2 kill game that you're going to ever get, and it's by far the safest way to grind in this thing, because if you try to bring bombs to go for bases, or you try to use the radar missiles to kill people at high altitude, you're just gonna die, teammates are gonna beat you to the bases, it's just gonna be miserable. Just bring the 2 Magic 2s, don't bother with the extra weight, get your 2 free kills, repeat. With all of that out of the way, the question is the vehicle worth it? So, for $69.99 USD, you will find yourself with the Mirage F1C-200, 2,500 Golden Eagles, in 20 days of premium time. So is it worth that cost? No, I don't think this plane is worth it in the slightest. $70 is a ridiculous price for this plane. And let's be honest, the only reason why anyone's buying this thing is the fact that it's the only rank 7 premium in the French air tech tree. Meaning, until they add a new one, if you want the Rafale or a Mirage 2000, Mirage 4000, this is realistically your only choice if you want to get it done quickly. I wouldn't even say this thing is worth it on sale. But, like I said, it's also the only option if you want to grind top tier France with only one plane. And because of that, I know a lot of people are gonna still buy it. And I can't really blame you. The Rafale looks really fun, the Mirage 2000s are great, and well, you don't really have much of a choice unless you want to wait for the inevitable top tier Benelux premium. So if you're patient, I would say just wait. There will inevitably be a new top tier French premium for air. There's been a lot of recent top tier air vehicles getting added to the game as either squadrons or premiums. France hasn't gotten theirs yet, but I'm sure it's coming soon. I'd imagine before the summer update next year, we'll probably have one. With all of that out of the way, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please let me know in the comments if there's any vehicles you'd like to see in the future of this series. Have a good one.